We live our entire lives thinking we know who we are. We have a name, a job title, a personality type. We know what we like, what we believe, what we want. But Carl Jung would ask, do you truly know yourself or just your ego? In a world obsessed with self-image, we often confuse the surface for the source. We spend years building an identity, but rarely question, who is the one behind that identity? You might think, I am my thoughts, my story, my voice. But Jung challenges that he saw the ego, the conscious mind, as just the tip of a much deeper iceberg. And beneath it lies something far more mysterious. The self, not who you think you are, but who you actually are. This video will take you into that mystery. We'll explore the key difference between ego and self, why most people never discover the self, and how your life changes when you begin to. Because until you see beyond the ego, you're not truly living. You're just performing a version of yourself the world taught you to be. And maybe, just maybe, that's not who you were meant to be. Carl Jung described the ego as the center of consciousness, not the whole self, but the part that says, I. It is the voice in your head narrating your life. It's the part of you that knows your name, remembers your past, and has opinions, preferences, and goals. In simple terms, the ego is your sense of identity, who you think you are. From a young age, we begin constructing this ego. I'm the smart one. I'm shy. I'm not artistic. I'm the one who always helps others. These are not truths. They're roles shaped by experience, family, culture, and trauma. Jung saw the ego not as bad, but as limited. It's necessary for functioning in the world. But if we mistake it for the whole of who we are, we become trapped in a tiny room inside a vast mansion, convinced that the room is the entire house. The illusion of control. The ego craves control. It wants to be right. It wants to look good. It avoids anything that threatens its identity. That's why, when we're criticized, we get defensive. When we fail, we feel ashamed. When someone questions our beliefs, we feel attacked. But this isn't the true self being hurt. It's the ego, protecting its image at all costs. Jung noted that the ego is often fragile, yet it pretends to be strong. And when the unconscious mind, our fears, desires, dreams, begins to surface, the ego panics. Why? Because it fears losing control. It fears dissolving into something it can't define. Ego vs. wholeness. The ego seeks consistency. I must always be this kind of person. But life is not consistent. Sometimes we're confident. Sometimes we're scared. Sometimes we love. Sometimes we hate. The ego tries to pick one side and deny the other. But Jung's work was all about integration. He believed that wholeness only comes when we face the parts of ourselves the ego has rejected. So the problem isn't the ego itself. It's when the ego blocks the rest of you from being seen. The ego is a mask in Latin. The word persona means mask. And that's often what the ego becomes. A mask we wear to survive, to fit in, to be accepted. But what happens when the mask becomes our face? When we believe that our job, our personality type, or our Instagram profile is who we are, we lose touch with the deeper self, the part of us that isn't defined by roles, status, or success. The first step to begin real self-discovery. You don't need to destroy the ego. You just need to stop worshiping it. You start by asking, if this isn't all of me, then what else is there? And that question leads us to the next step, understanding the self, not the character you play, but the consciousness behind it all. If the ego is the center of consciousness, then the self, according to Carl Jung, is the center of the entire psyche. That includes not only the conscious mind, but also the vast, mysterious world of the unconscious, dreams, Instincts, shadows, symbols, archetypes, all that lives beneath the surface of who we think we are. The self is not a role, not a personality, not even your sense of I. The self is the whole of who you are, the totality of the known and the unknown. It is not built, it is discovered. It is not created by the mind, it contains the mind. It is not what you decide to be, it is what you were always meant to become. Self as inner wholeness. Jung described the self as an inner organizing principle, like a deep intelligence of the soul that seeks balance, unity, and integration. Where ego divides, self unites. The self is not good or bad. It holds all opposites together, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, joy and sorrow. It is the total field in which your inner drama unfolds. That's why Jung often used symbols to represent the self. The mandala, a circle representing totality. The divine child, symbol of innocence and potential. The wise old man or great mother, appearing in dreams. And even Christ, as a symbol of integration and transformation. These are not religious statements, but archetypal images of the self, trying to reach your consciousness. The self guides you, but silently, unlike the ego, which is loud and opinionated. The self often speaks in whispers, a dream you can't shake, a repeated life pattern, a synchronicity that feels meaningful, a longing that won't go away. These are not accidents. They are messages from the deeper self, calling you back to wholeness. But here's the paradox. You can't find the self by looking directly at it. You find it by becoming more conscious of everything you are not, by facing the shadow, by listening to the unconscious, by letting go of who you think you're supposed to be. The self is both you and more than youth. Self is you, but also more than you. It is who you truly are, not just in this moment, but across the arc of your life, across all the selves you have been and will become. Jung believed the self has a kind of blueprint, an inner destiny, and your task in life is not to invent it, but to unfold it. Like a seed doesn't decide to become a tree. It simply grows into what it already is. That's how the self works. Why most people never meet their self, because they never look beyond the ego. They stay in the safety of identity, a role, a title, a belief system. But the self lives in the unknown. And to meet it, you have to let go of control. You have to surrender the illusion of certainty. You have to walk through the darkness and trust that something deeper is guiding you. And so, the greatest question becomes, am I ready to stop living as who I think I am and start living as who I really am? We spend most of our lives inside a story, a mental image of who we are, what we're good at, what we're afraid of, what we're allowed to be. This story is shaped by our past, our culture, our wounds, and our hopes for approval. That story has a voice. It says things like, I'm just not that type of person. I always screw things up. I need people to like me. I'm smart, but I'm not creative. That voice is the ego. It feels like you, but it's not. It's a carefully constructed image, one that keeps you safe, accepted, and predictable. And Carl Jung would gently remind us, you are not the image. You are the one behind it. The ego lives in fear. The ego doesn't want wholeness. It wants control. It fears anything that doesn't fit its narrative. That's why we feel triggered when someone sees through us, or when a dream brings up something uncomfortable, or when life forces us to face a side of ourselves we've hidden. The ego says, this is not me. That doesn't belong. But what it's really saying is, that threatens the version of me I've spent years protecting. So we repress, we deny, we project, we laugh things off. We stay busy. We keep our relationships shallow, all because we're protecting a mask we've mistaken for a face, Ego keeps you in a loop. The ego operates through thought. It analyzes, compares, justifies, defends that. It's constantly looking outward. Am I doing well? Do they like me? Am I ahead or behind? This keeps you locked in a cycle. Perform, evaluate, react, repeat. But no matter how much the ego wins, it's never enough. Because it was never meant to lead, only to serve. Realizations that frighten the ego moments of awakening often shake us. You realize you've been chasing someone else's dream. You suddenly feel empty after reaching a big goal. You see a side of yourself in someone you dislike. You sense that your life looks successful, but feels dead inside. These aren't breakdowns. They're breakthroughs. They happen when the deeper self knocks on the door. But the ego sees them as threats. It says, don't open that. You'll lose control, and maybe you will. But maybe control was never what you needed. Maybe you needed truth. The voice behind. The voice. Try this for a moment. Notice the voice in your head right now. The one reading these words. The one thinking about what this all means. Now ask yourself, who is aware of that voice? That silent awareness, that presence watching your thoughts, is closer to the self than anything the ego can name. The ego narrates, but the self observes. And in that space of awareness, you begin to realize something profound. I am not my thoughts. I am the one who sees them. Freedom beyond the ego. Once you stop identifying with the ego, a quiet freedom begins to rise. You no longer need to win every argument. You no longer fear being wrong. You no longer panic when someone doesn't approve of you, because you know deep down that you are more than your image, and that more is not something to chase. It's something to remember. So if you've ever felt like something in your life was missing, even though you were doing everything right, maybe it wasn't missing. Maybe it was simply waiting for you to remember who you really are. Many people, upon discovering the ego's limitations, want to get rid of it. They say, I need to destroy my ego. I want to be egoless. I'm tired of the false self. But Jung would warn against that. The ego is not evil. It is not your enemy. It is simply incomplete. In Jungian psychology, the path to wholeness is not about erasing the ego. It's about repositioning it. Let the ego exist, just not as the king. Let the self lead, and the ego follow. Why you still need an ego? You need an ego to function in the world. That's what gets you out of bed, sets goals, navigates relationships, and keeps track of your personal identity. Without an ego, you lose your anchor. You become fragmented, confused, lost in the unconscious. The problem arises when the ego tries to do the job of the self, when it wants total control, absolute certainty, and constant approval. But the self plays a deeper game. It works through symbols, dreams, intuition, and transformation. The ego wants to succeed. The self wants you to grow. And sometimes that growth requires letting go of success, identity, or comfort. That's where conflict arises. Ego resists, self integrates. Imagine your psyche as a solar system. The ego is like one planet, important, unique, but not central. The self is the sun, the gravitational center that holds everything together. If the ego tries to be the sun, everything falls out of orbit. But when the ego surrenders to the self, a new harmony arises. That's why Jung sighed, the goal of individuation is not to become perfect, but to become whole. Wholeness doesn't mean shining all the time. It means holding your contradictions, to be strong and vulnerable, not to be joyful and grieving, not to be disciplined and spontaneous. The ego picks sides. The self embraces both. Dreams and symbols. Self calling to ego. Jung believed that dreams are messages. From the self to the ego. When you dream of falling, drowning, losing control, It might be the self inviting the ego to surrender, to let go of the illusion of power. When you dream of a child, a wise figure, or a circle, it may be the self, reminding you of your deeper potential. These dreams aren't just fantasies. They are invitations. The self speaks in symbols, not in language, but in meaning. The more the ego listens, the more integrated you become. The self reorganizes you from the inside. There comes a moment when you begin to feel it. You no longer panic when your plans fall apart. You stop needing to prove yourself in every conversation. You feel a quiet strength that doesn't come from being right, but from being real. This is not weakness. This is the self at work. It is reshaping the ego, not by force, but through understanding. It teaches the ego to serve a larger vision, to bow to something beyond itself. And in doing so, the ego becomes more human, more humble, more useful. Balance is the goal. The path is not about ego versus self. It's about relationship. When the ego learns to trust the self, you stop reacting and start responding. You stop performing and start embodying. You stop surviving and start living. Because now your identity is not based on a fixed image, but on an evolving truth. The ego still speaks, but it no longer shouts. The self whispers, and you finally begin to listen. Carl Jung believed that the true purpose of life is not to become good, successful, or even happy, but to become whole. That process of becoming whole, he called individuation. Individuation is the journey of integrating the unconscious with the conscious, the shadow with the persona, the inner child with the adult self, the ego with the self. It is not a straight path. It is not quick or painless, but it is the path of becoming who you truly are. Stage 1. Questioning the mask. Journey begins when the persona, the social mask, begins to crack. Maybe you feel tired of pretending. Maybe success no longer satisfies you. Maybe you realize that what you've built isn't truly you. This is the call to adventure. But the ego resists. It says, don't change. You're safe here. Still, something deeper whispers, there's more to you than this. This moment of discomfort, of inner tension, is sacred. It's the self beginning to call. Stage 2. Confronting the shadow. To move forward, you must face the parts of yourself the ego has rejected. Your anger, your envy, your insecurity, your desire, your fear. This is the shadow. It's not evil. It's unconscious. Until you see it, it controls you. Once you face it, it becomes energy. This stage is hard. You may feel shame, rage, confusion. But here's the truth. The parts you most want to hide often contain the keys to your freedom. Stage 3. Meeting the inner guide. As you face the darkness, you may begin to dream more vividly. You may encounter symbols, mentors, synchronicities. These are not coincidences. Jung believed that the self guides the journey, often through archetypes like the wise old man, the great mother, or the inner child. They appear not to give you answers, but to help you ask deeper questions. At this stage, therapy, journaling, active imagination, or spiritual practice can become profound tools. Because now, the ego is no longer in charge. It's becoming receptive. Stage 4. Integration and transformation. The final stage is not a destination. It is a new way of being. You no longer live from the surface. You act from the center. You're not just reacting, you're responding. Not just surviving, you're creating. Not just performing, you're expressing something real. Become capable of paradox, holding, strength and softness. Clarity and mystery. Movement and stillness. You stop identifying with any one role. You begin to feel at home in your own being. This is what Jung called self-realization. Not perfection, not enlightenment, but wholeness. The journey never truly ends. Individuation is not something you complete and move on from. It's a spiral, deeper and deeper into yourself. Each crisis, each relationship, each stage of life invites you into new layers of integration. And every time you say yes, you come closer to what you are always meant to be. Not someone else's version of success, not society's idea of you, but a fully alive, fully present, fully whole human being. So, who are you? You are not just your name, not your profession, not your story, your trauma, your opinions, or your image in the mirror. All of those belong to the ego. But you are the one who observes it all. You are the space behind your thoughts, the presence beneath your roles, the stillness at the center of your chaos. That quiet witness, that's the beginning of the self. Carl Jung didn't ask us to reject the ego. He asked us to see through it, to recognize that it's not all of who we are, just a mask we've worn for too long. And the moment you begin to see beyond that mask, the real journey begins. The journey inward, the journey toward wholeness, the journey toward home. If this video stirred something in you, if you feel a quiet pull to go deeper, that's the self calling. Don't ignore it. Like this video, subscribe for more Junjin insights, and share it with someone who may need to remember who they truly are. Isn't self-help. This is soul work, and it's only just beginning.